Most recently, Vice President Harris's trip to Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia, and the AmCham Business Summit in Nairobi, Kenya. These activities send a clear message that the U.S. is committed to working with its African partners alongside the U.S. business community. The Vice President announced a new billion-dollar commitment to women's economic empowerment, an issue that's very dear to my heart. And she also highlighted complementary private sector initiatives like Shea Aline's digital payments pilot that we're doing with our shea butter suppliers in Ghana. PAC-DBIA members Visa and Pfizer were also featured in this commitment. We look forward to the U.S. government's continued efforts to create environments in which small and medium enterprises, the diaspora, and women-owned businesses can thrive. Our recommendations report, which we'll present today, aims to contribute to U.S.-Africa policy objectives, recognizing U.S.-Africa trade as a critical partnership for the mutual prosperity for both markets. Our work reflects the importance we place on creating lasting positive change for both Africa and the United States. I would now like to turn to my co-chair, Peter Sullivan, who's joining us from London. Peter?
Thanks so much, Mahama. I'm proud to co-chair the PAC-DBIA with you and work with all the members who represent the U.S. private sector that are investing and doing business across Africa. The PAC is comprised of different size firms with varied experiences across sectors and in different countries, offering a unique and informed perspective on Africa. With the recommendations we are presenting here today, we hope that we will serve to enhance and optimize the U.S. government's toolkit in strengthening commercial partnerships throughout the African continent. Before we share the specific recommendations from the PAC's sectorial subcommittees, Takreem and I wanted to highlight two key overarching recommendations from the report. First, we strongly advocate the administration to better utilize the PAC as a resource for U.S. commercial engagement. We are a ready-made cadre of American firms that can visibly and tangibly partner with the U.S. government. There is no better way to demonstrate our partnership approach to our African allies than to showcase the strong relationship and alignment between the U.S. public and private sectors. Second, we suggest close private sector collaboration on the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGII, that results in a pipeline for deals, particularly transport, rural, and energy infrastructure for Africa. For example, with over 50 years on the continent, CITIC aims to bring our expertise and experience to contribute to reducing the financial gaps for both infrastructure and investment. Africa faces a critical inflection point where current headwinds of debt stress, food insecurity, climate change, and job creation can be turned into transformational tailwinds of fiscal resilience, agricultural self-sufficiency, environmental sustainability, and economic opportunity for all. The U.S. is perfectly placed to proactively and predominantly contribute to this transformation through the strong partnership of the American public and private sector. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our Vice Chair, Takreem.
Thank you, Peter. It is a true honor as a son of Africa to serve on my third term on this important President's Advisory Council representing IBM. For nearly a century, IBM has collaborated with African businesses and governments to deliver innovations that matter, from supporting PEPFAR's last-mile drug delivery to Egypt's comprehensive e-taxation system. In my 2 decades of experience in Africa, and also in my current global role, I have witnessed Africa becoming the central geography in the global dialogue on economic opportunity and growth. The continent potential is undisputed. That's why this PAC-DBIA is so vital. As Peter said, please rely on us. And as we wrote in our letter to President Biden, continue your strong work on making it easier for U.S. businesses to do business in Africa. We recommend developing a concierge resource within Prosper Africa or elsewhere for easier access to the many U.S. government financial support programs and tools. A one-stop shop that is web and mobile accessible, conversational, and a self-service experience. It can provide immediate answers and suggested next step actions. It would modernize what is now, at times, a cumbersome process, particularly for small and medium-sized firms, many of which are diaspora-led, that are key job creators in the US and Africa. Lastly, we commend your ask of Congress to increase funding for Prosper Africa and the Departments of State and Commerce. Additional funding for staff and critical resources would contribute to this one-stop shop. I have overseen the technical build of such for other trade and investment agencies. They can be transformative in extending agencies' reach and more effectively support businesses, as well as advancing the government's foreign policy interests. Speaking of foreign policy interests, I want to recognize Judd Devermont, National Security Council Senior Director for African Affairs, to share with this group the Biden's administration interests in Africa.
Thank you, Takreem. Let me start by saying thanks to everyone for being here today. Thanks to the PAC, the cooler way to say it, just the PAC, for your commitment to strengthening commercial ties and engagement between the United States and African countries. I want to do a special shout out to the Department of Commerce for all your hard work in making this event possible today. As many of you know, the Biden-Harris administration made it a priority to expand and deepen our commercial partnerships in Africa. And we see that as a means to advance the prosperity both for Africans and for Americans. At the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit last year, President Biden said that he was all in on Africa. And the reasons, I think, are increasingly evident. Africa is critical to advancing our shared global interests. If we want to make progress on addressing climate change, tackle the next global pandemic, confront democratic backsliding, if we want to define the rules of the road for economies, trade, for tech, it is imperative that Africans have a seat at the table. Let me just say it again. We believe that Africans need to be at the table. We need African leadership if we're going to address these problems and seize the opportunities in front of us. And what makes sense for geopolitics, I think, also makes sense for commerce. At the summit, we worked very closely with African and American businesses to announce $15 billion in private sector commitments and investments. And as Rama alluded to, Vice President Harris made another $1 billion commitment for women's empower, and I'll add that she also made another $7 billion commitment on climate resilience. So count them, that's $23 billion since December of last year. We're really proud of this work. We can't rest on our laurels. We know that we have to do more to generate new opportunities and grow the U.S. private sector market share, especially in areas such as agribusiness, energy, entertainment, healthcare, and technology. After all, this is what our value proposition is. We leverage the best of America. That includes all of the tools across our government, private sector, and civil society so that we can partner with and support African institutions, citizens, and nations to advance our shared goals. To do this, we need the expertise and the experience of people in this room, in the private sector, in the PAC, so that we can get the essential insights and inputs so we can continue to refine our policy process. That's why you are all so important to the work that we do and why we value the contributions that you made with this report and you will be making over the lifetime of your tenure on the PAC. We will look at these recommendations very seriously. They will spur, I promise you, a very rigorous dialogue about how we do better, how we partner with you. And so I want to thank particularly the council leadership and its members for crafting these very thoughtful, deliberate recommendations. Probably the most important thing here is that we are joined by Deputy Secretary Graves, and who shares all of our commitment to Africa and increasing our trade investment. So, sir, thank you for joining us, and I'll yield the floor.
Well, Judd, thank you very much for your leadership here at the White House, for those framing remarks, and I think you laid it out really well. Takreem and Peter and Rahama, thank you for your leadership of this council. Thank you to all of the members of the PAC-DBIA for your commitment. It is not easy to make the time to do yet another thing on top of very busy professional lives, focusing on Africa and other places. Thank you for being a part of this meeting, and thank you for all of the work, including the recommendations that have led up to today. I am really excited about this meeting, which is part of the reason that I forced some schedule changes on the secretary's schedule so that I could be the one that stayed here for the entire time. I would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge two really important friends. There are a lot of friends in the room, but there are two special friends without whom I suspect that the work that this administration is doing would have fallen flat, and frankly, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are as quickly as we have. And first, that's Scott Eisner from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's U.S. Africa Business Center. Mr. President, thank you. And of course, Florie Lizer from the CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa. Thank you both. We collaborate with them so often. They make our lives so much easier because they're able to provide those informal consultations, the guidance. They can get us answers, and just as importantly, they can help us get to the right U.S. businesses and know the lay of the land across the continent. You've been such big supporters of our work and PAC-DBIA, so thank you for both joining us, but also thank you for all the work that you've been doing. I had the chance to meet most of the members of the PAC-DBIA. Maybe I'll just call it the PAC, Judd. The PAC back in December, informally, when the Secretary and I attended your informal meeting at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit and the Business Forum. And I will tell you that my team has been keeping us informed of everything that you've been doing, all of the good conversations. It's something that I know Das Richardson gets a little bit tired of meeting with me, but I have a keen interest in what happens on the continent, particularly the way that the U.S. government supports the work that you all are doing, the work that we as a country are doing on the continent. So I am also excited about what I think will be competing trips from the Secretary and myself this year. We're going to see who gets to announce the biggest things, the commitments, and we're also committed, I should say this up front, to making sure that we can see how we get the PAC-DBIA to be a part of our trips. I know it's important to you. It's also important to me and to the Secretary. So I just want to make sure that you know that that's at the top of our list. The Secretary and I firmly believe in the President's and the Vice President's vision for the U.S.-Africa partnership in the next decade. It is critical. Now is the time to be engaged. Frankly, we're playing a little bit of catch-up. We should have been engaged more robustly prior to now, but there's a lot more that we can do. This is going to be the quintessential 21st century partnership. It's going to be driven by trade, investment, commercial ties, in sectors that drive job creation, competitiveness on both sides of the Atlantic. And so the recommendations that you all are providing today, I think, will be able to give us the ability to turn that vision that the President has had and the Vice President has had into reality. But it can't be done without a whole of government approach. There's too many folks here in the room for me to thank and appreciate their engagement. But I do want to call out two partners, Director Ebong, who has become a dear friend in this process. I know that USTDA is a critical part of this. Also, Molly Fee, the Assistant Secretary at State. This partnership between State, Commerce, TDA, EXIM, DFC, and so many other parts of the federal government is going to be critical, and I think the fact that we're all here today is a testament to how much we appreciate what the PAC is doing and the critical advisory role that you all play in moving things forward. I will quickly just talk about the reality, because it's one thing to talk up here, and it's a whole different matter to talk about the reality, what we can actually do, learning from you, talking with you, working with you. So a few of the recommendations that this group has provided that has led to real change, real innovation in our approaches include evolutions in U.S. government financing. I know that's a critical piece. It's critical for you. It's just as critical for folks on the continent. So the evolution of these tools that are designed to leverage private capital for Africa, including our early experience with blended finance. The Commerce Department has created a new digital solution for disseminating early-stage trade leads to U.S. companies, another thing that we heard directly from you all, and that's called Express Leads Middle East and Africa. It's a way for us to get more information as quickly to you about opportunities as we can. There's also a great new partnership between TDA and the government of Kenya under the Global Procurement Initiative. I'm sure you will talk about that in a little bit. A new model of engagement to elevate our commercial diplomacy with African governments through our bilateral commercial MOUs, and that it's an effort that began through the PAC in 2018 with a trip to the continent back then, and it's continued to yield new partnerships ever since, including our recent MOU that the Vice President announced just last week with the government of Zambia. So we're making good progress, but keep bringing these great recommendations because it will enable us to enable you. I'm not going to take too much more time. I'll just say that you all have conducted a number of important high-impact trips to Africa. You did one in 2016, one in 2018, and it's a key source of input in helping to shape the international roadmap for how we engage around Prosper Africa. In the current term, the PAC is organized into subcommittees, as you all know, with sectors that are really highlighting everything that we saw at the U.S.-Africa Business Forum. So what you are doing allows us to be more proactive on those specific silos. We'll go back into them over the course of the conversation. And the recommendations that you're providing to us today are going to allow us to drive a lot of this work forward, especially around two-way trade and investment that's going to be crucial to U.S. and African economies. So as you begin to make your presentations, let me commit to all of you that my colleagues and I will consider all of the recommendations with as much careful thought as you put into developing them. As these things go, there may be some tweaks, there may be some back and forth, but having led, having been the director of a separate advisory council to the president years past, I know that the work that you do is actually going to frame up everything that we do going forward. Your recommendations are absolutely vital to everything that we do. We've mobilized all of our teams across the entire Department of Commerce, the Secretary and I have. This is not an International Trade Administration solely focused effort. This is a whole of commerce and a whole of government approach. So we're going to bring a bunch of new tools, a bunch of new resources. You have my commitment. The Secretary, I saw her just before I ran out of the office to come over here. She said to tell you that she is also committed to taking your recommendations and engaging with you collectively and individually. With that, I've said way too much. I will hush up so that we can get to the really important discussions. Rahma, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. I would like to turn to our Vice Chair, Takreem, to begin the program.
So thank you again, Deputy. So thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves. We will now present our PAC's recommendations, starting with healthcare. I recognize Patrick van der Loo.
Thank you very much, Takreem, and thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves, and all members of the United States Interagency for convening us today. I would also like to thank my fellow PAC-DBIA members for their partnership, their leadership, and collaboration. We learned many important lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, including the strong connection between health and economic well-being. Our two recommendations reflect that interconnectedness and seek to remove barriers that prevent US companies from contributing more to both the health and the economic well-being of African people. Our first recommendation is focused on strengthening the regulatory systems and removing trade barriers. A predictable, transparent, and harmonized regulatory environment is fundamental to supporting health investment and patients' access to medicines. In all of our individual company engagements with African government officials, each will quickly highlight that if we invest in their country, we have access to a common market of 1.2 billion people. However, there is no single market for health-related products and services. Each government has different regulatory standards that companies must meet. The requirement for individual market authorizations, export permits, and the need to meet local standards eliminate economies of scale that would allow for greater investments. Removing these individual standards through the African Medicines Agency, or even within the regional economic communities, is critical for removing barriers that prevent patient access and disincentivize local investment. Unfortunately, we have recent firsthand experience. Pfizer invested heavily in a local South African facility to manufacture and store our mRNA COVID-19 vaccine to supply the African continent. But unfortunately, we were not able to export to any other African countries due to regulatory requirements and lack of harmonization of regulatory efforts. For this reason, the PAC-DBIA recommends the creation of a healthcare regulatory dialogue between the US government and African Union, along with capacity building initiatives. It would focus on increasing regulatory harmonization, as well as implementation of reliance of methods. Our second recommendation reflects the changing healthcare landscape in Africa. Most USG funding and development assistance is currently allocated for addressing infectious diseases. Yet the burden of non-communicable diseases continues to grow exponentially and has not only a negative impact on each market, but on the economic competitiveness of the continent as a whole. By addressing cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, along with infectious diseases, US companies in partnership with African governments can ensure that there is a vibrant economic environment to enable trade. For this reason, our second recommendation calls for expanding the scope of USG programming and funding for global health initiatives to be inclusive of non-communicable diseases. This involves a whole-of-government approach to addressing the burden of disease and a patient-centric model to ensure that we're addressing the patient needs along with life continuum. Again, thank you for the time today, and we stand ready to work with you to implement and execute these recommendations. Back to you, Takreem.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I now turn to Kate Tolenko to amplify.
And it's a pleasure to be here. So I'd like to give two quick illustrative case studies around our recommendations. So first, on regulatory harmonization. I'd like to give an example from Corvus Health. So we're a global health workforce firm addressing the African and global workforce shortage. We've established a group procurement organization for nursing schools in Africa to reduce the cost of all their inputs and to help them scale up. But we have to navigate 54 separate import and customs systems. So this significantly increases the complexity and cost of our work and leaves our imported goods vulnerable to delays, expiration, theft, and bribe requests. So by harmonizing import regulations, the US government will greatly assist American companies doing business in Africa. On the second recommendation on NCD funding, the NCD funding recommendation is both an appeal to humanitarian causes and economic grounds. On the economic side, not only will US NCD funding help more Africans continue to work and be able to support their families, but it will help Africa capture the billions of dollars that are currently being sent every year to India, Turkey, the Middle East, on healthcare, mostly in NCDs, cancer care, cardiac care, orthopedic care. By allowing this treatment to occur in Africa, it'll be done more cost-effectively, a more culturally appropriate way. And just to give the illustrated example for Corvus Health, we're in the process of setting up a tele-oncology program, but under current U.S. funding guidelines, there are few programs that would be able to finance it. Thanks. Deputy Secretary.
Thank you very much, Kate. I now recognize esteemed colleagues in the Biden administration to provide reactions. So, Deputy Secretary Graves.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your thoughtful recommendations. I'll take them in turn. The recommendation on the new regulatory dialogue with the African Union is, I think, is a very important, very good recommendation for your insights on barriers inhibiting access to high-quality American medicine and to medical products in Africa. Harmonization of healthcare standards, I think, as you all likely know, or maybe you don't, is an issue that we are focused on across the federal government right now. It's something we're focused on. The USTR is in negotiations, for instance, with, with Kenya under the U.S.-Kenya Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. And as you indicate in your recommendation, progress on this front at the sub-regional level will be critical to creating the building blocks for the greater harmonization at a Pan-African level that's envisioned under the AFCFTA. Commerce, I think, would absolutely welcome the ability to, the partnership in working with our colleagues at the State Department who manage the bilateral relationship with the African Union and consider a way forward on proposing a new dialogue with the AU on these issues. I'd also add that how important the Department of Health and Human Services, their health attachés are currently in Kenya and South Africa to help guide these efforts on harmonization, along with Commerce's standards attaché in South Africa. So we're getting, again, that whole of government approach. Let me end by talking about our commercial law development program, which many of you, I'm sure, know. It could be an excellent resource to help lead on the capacity building side. That's their job. The nexus of regulatory framework development and technical assistance, I think, is exactly where the CLDP could be most effective. Of course, CLDP also, their programs require foreign assistance authorized funding. That's a challenge. We don't have that currently internally, so we need to work with our partners across the interagency to be able to get that done. But again, that's a whole of government approach. Our healthcare industry experts at the International Trade Administration, along with our National Institutes of Standards and Technology, can provide what I think would be valuable technical input on the ways that we can engage and specifically the expertise on the content. And as always, you don't have to remind me or tell me that we should be working with our good colleagues at TDA. You don't have to convince me. I spend enough time with Director Ibong to know that any hour that I can get with her is worth its weight in gold. So we will be continuing to amplify the ways that we can work collaboratively, and just know that we're all in working with the director and her team. Thanks, Takreem.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves. I recognize Assistant Secretary of State Molly Fee.
Thank you very much. And just let me say, it's a delight to see all of you. This has been long overdue, and we're thrilled to begin energizing our work and collaboration with you. To the recommendations at hand, as has been said, it's clear that regulatory harmonization is essential, and we will be upping our game in terms of increasing our efforts to engage with the African Union. We are already working with the U.S. government, as Deputy Secretary Graves mentioned, DHS, also other regional and multilateral partners and foundations, and specifically at the AU with the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Program. But there are many pieces to the AU, many which have a stake in these complicated and contentious trade issues. So we're happy to take that on and see what else we can do. As some of you know, I've been concerned that we in the Africa Bureau at the State Department need to up our game. And so we have recently released a commercial development strategy, commercial diplomacy strategy that would take advantage of, I think, what we offer, which is real estate and access and influence through our embassies on the continent. And as you have already identified, we identified in that strategy the importance of a public-private dialogue on health regulatory issues with the AU. So I just want to commit to that here. We also agree that it's important to have a holistic approach to the health systems in Africa, particularly addressing the rise of non-communicable diseases. And we also believe that your role in helping in this sector, as we see here today, and I think as we've seen through the PEPFAR program, is really critical. So we're delighted to have your partnership. And finally, I just want to underscore what I think many of you know, is that we're really lucky to have Dr. John Ngengasong working at the State Department, leading on behalf of the Secretary our engagement on health security. And he is a terrific partner to me. Africans really are responding positively to his emphasis on moving away sort of from assistance and building up, I think, the private sector capability as well as the resilience of healthcare systems. So I just want you to know that we're very good partners, and we will continue to draw on his skill and background. So thanks.
Thank you. I turn to USTDA Director, Ino Iban.
Thank you so much, Takim, and thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves, for your leadership on strengthening our commercial engagement with Africa. I do want to thank the PAC, it is a thing now, Judd, thank you, for the, as everybody has said, comprehensive, thoughtful, actionable recommendations. And with respect to this one, for your interest in leveraging USTDA's support for a single African market for health products. I thought I'd use my time just to talk a little bit about what our engagement could bring practically to the discussion. So the vehicle for our engagement will be USTDA's Coalition for Healthcare Infrastructure in Africa. It's an initiative that we launched with many of you in this room, with US industry, to advance Africa's healthcare infrastructure in terms of priorities in partnership with its public and private sectors. The two are key on the continent. The coalition is also designed to increase access to quality products and services for millions of people across the continent because, of course, we believe that greater access to US technology and healthcare technology will save lives. With the vast growth opportunity on the continent, advancing market entry for US healthcare companies is critical. We have heard from US industry that USTDA has an important role to play in the regulatory environment. We invite you all in US industry to join us as we plan a series of workshops related to regulatory convergence for healthcare products in Africa. These events will be implemented over the course of a 2-year period with the goal of supporting continental alignment with international standards and convergence of regulatory healthcare systems. We look forward to following up with you on these events, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Iban. Now to Rahama to cover the Agribusiness and Food and Water Security.
All right, I would like to recognize Mr. Jason Bratley from John Deere to provide a summary of recommendations.
Thank you, Rahama, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here today presenting the Agribusiness and Food and Water Security Subcommittee's recommendations. These are important and interrelated areas, and they're critical for health and security, and they also play a very important economic role in Africa. Our first recommendation centers on the theme of the PGII and the focused infrastructure investments that serve the unique needs of agribusiness to bolster food and water security in Africa. The PGII is clearly a feature of this report. we as a subcommittee sought to bring attention to the opportunities in and especially around the rural infrastructure space. Ag-related infrastructure includes rural roads, power, cold chain, warehousing, storage, and ports. And these cater to food and perishable goods that support the economy and export. A focus on these unique areas of hard infrastructure would foster a value chain approach that supports the entire life cycle, from seeds and ag chemical inputs to farming logistics and packaging that supports food conservation and enhances food security by ensuring more product reaches markets. Infrastructure for water security has a unique consideration in that there are distinct rural and urban applications. In a rural context, this is around crop irrigation, water pumping, distribution, and water storage infrastructure. To drive this focus on ag-related infrastructure, we call for two things. First, for a subset of the $200 billion allocated to PGII, it needs to be focused on infrastructure that directly supports the agricultural and water ecosystems. And two, for a platform to be created to better enable companies to understand the investment opportunities among DFIs, especially in rural infrastructure. This area often goes underactivated. This could be through the Department of Commerce, but we also see a strong role here for Prosper Africa. Our second recommendation focuses on how the U.S. government can help boost exposure to U.S. tools and technologies around climate-smart agriculture. The African continent and the agricultural sector are on the front lines of the adverse impacts of climate change. There's much to be done, and the U.S. private sector is very well positioned to help. Investments in agriculture can be and must be more climate smart, offering technologies and other effective solutions that help farmers optimize input usage, including fuel and fertilizers, gain access to drought-resistant seeds, improve their mechanization operations, promote efficient irrigation techniques, and reduce post-harvest crop loss. This increases the food supply and farmer profitability. This recommendation focuses on the establishment of coordinated field days, which leverage the resources of both USAID's Feed the Future and USDA's Aim for Climate initiatives. These events would include elements of both policy and practice to drive a lasting shift towards climate-smart agriculture. We also envision roundtables with African policymakers, U.S. government supporters, and both the African and U.S. private sectors to discuss how we can foster sustainable solutions and investment in this sector. Concurrently, we envision demonstrations where companies with viable climate-smart solutions can showcase these tools and technologies that, once adopted, can enable ag operations to be more environmentally friendly. And with that very brief summary, I'll turn the floor back over to you, Rahama.
Thank you, Jason. Given the importance of agriculture to the African workforce, its unrealized potential for huge productivity gains, and its vulnerability to climate change, it's a sector we cannot overlook. About 60 to 80% of African women work in agriculture, and they produce about 70% of Africa's food, yet their yields are much lower than men's because of poor access to inputs and access to capital and financing. On a continent in which 1/5 of the population is food insecure, it just makes sense to invest in women farmers. Just as they have the highest ceiling for crop yield increases, they are the most at risk for the effects of climate change. We welcomed Vice President Harris's announcement in Zambia that the U.S. government will provide new federal funding and initiatives to further accelerate the implementation of the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. And this program aims to do a couple of things. One is address the pressing needs resulting from the climate crisis, including food security challenges, helping to lift up over 116 million farmers and promoting climate-smart agriculture. An example of this support is the Prosper Africa and USAID's trade and investment project plans that will provide $1.5 million to launch a new fertilizer fund in Zambia. The second thing is to expand access to climate information services and enhancing climate resilience and adaptation. For example, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency's U.S.-Africa Climate Innovation Week will advance the development of climate-resistant projects in Africa by hosting leaders from across the continent to showcase innovative American technologies and best practices that can benefit Africa's infrastructure for water management, as well as identifying early...
Everything is okay? Thank you.
It's a hot mic. As well as identifying early warning and emergency management systems. These announcements demonstrate America's commitment to partnering with African people and governments and the private sector to help the continent meet its climate adaptation and food security goals. With that, I would like to turn to you, Deputy Secretary Graves, to comment.
Well, thank you both for the recommendations. Well, thank the PAC for all of the recommendations. Thank you for providing the overview. I would be remiss, I know it wasn't specifically called out in your recommendations, but I would be remiss if I didn't start by talking about who the Department of Commerce is, in addition to being the Department of Business and International Trade and all of these things. We are also the climate agency for the U.S. government, particularly through our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which includes the National Weather Service. The work that we are doing there aligns with all of the recommendations. And what we have heard loud and clear from our partners on the continent is that they need more data to make better decisions around the investments that align with your recommendations, infrastructure investments, investments around water, around agriculture. And that's what we are doing and will do for the continent. We're committed to providing the best type of climate data, which includes climate observation, climate modeling, and climate prediction. Because, you know, if you're John Deere, you want to know where there's going to be opportunities for certain types of equipment to be used, I'm sure. And governments want to also know where's the best place to locate some of their investments. So that's what we can do at the top. Thank you for highlighting the need for a concerted focus on rural infrastructure that enables agriculture. You all know with more than 60% of sub-Saharan Africa's population engaged in smallholder farming and over 20% of the region's GDP driven from agriculture, your reminder of the unique infrastructure needs of the sector is absolutely welcome to all of us in government. Regarding your recommendations for leveraging our liaison officers to the multilateral development banks and utilizing our Express tools, Leads tool, I am pleased to report that our liaison offices at the African Development Bank and the World Bank have been working with colleagues at those institutions to conduct a number of roundtables with the private sector that are focused on these sectors, including recently at the African Development Bank, roundtables on digital, information communications technology, healthcare, pharmaceuticals. They've been absolutely valuable opportunities to showcase U.S. expertise at the African Development Bank, leadership that decision makers are using for procurement opportunities. And I believe that we're actually really well positioned to pursue these types of engagements across the continent, including with the Development Bank and the World Bank alike, focusing on agribusiness, focusing on ways to look at water security, and we welcome your input as we shape all of that. I'm very glad that you raised the Express Leads tool, which is, I think, a very simple, maybe, Camille, you would agree, a simple but very powerful means of providing early actionable information, as I said earlier, on opportunities to U.S. companies. We welcome your feedback specifically on that tool. Our liaison offices have been working with the Express Leads team to make sure that we're using that system effectively and efficiently, and that we're also notifying our commercial service teams, as well as our partners at state in embassies across the continent who have the deep networks to U.S. companies across sectors. We'll take a closer look at how we can use that to enhance our output for agribusiness leads. Regarding the recommendation on field days in the 5 subregions, that's a very creative idea, and I'm sure that we can explore how to leverage Commerce's export promotion services to help execute high-impact events. I'll have more later, but that's probably more than enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to turn to Ms. Helena Matza from PGII.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the PAC for your thoughtful inclusion of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment in your recommendations. This is particularly helpful as we're getting ready to go into our second year of implementation, and we really are taking on board the recommendations on hard infrastructure for food and water security on the continent. Through the implementation of PGII, we've organically expanded our approach to include agribusiness. For example, we've identified opportunities where we can leverage initial investments in rail expansions on the continent that act as transportation routes for critical mineral commodities to open new opportunities for potential two-way trade and spurs for agricultural products to move in and across the continent. In Angola and Zambia specifically, we're working with leadership from both countries to determine priority areas for agricultural activity and how we can use existing and planned infrastructure to advance food security in and across the region. We're building out our strategy in this space and look forward to further opportunities to interlink food and water security considerations into our broader infrastructure investments so we can do our best to leverage every public dollar of our own and our G7 partners for greater impact. With that, I'll turn the floor back.
Thank you. I would like to now invite Ms. Brooke Jameson from USDA.
Thank you, and thank you very much for adding agriculture and agribusiness to the agenda. I think if the Ukraine crisis taught us anything, it's the importance of agriculture supply chains that is so important to make sure that everyone in the world is fed. We strongly support the increase recommendation for infrastructure, especially hard infrastructure. Although I would add one thing, and I'll borrow it from our friends in healthcare, regulatory infrastructure has also been a large barrier. Our ag attaches who are in the embassies all over Africa, they ask repeatedly, some of the big agribusinesses in the world, ADM, Cargill, Bunge, why aren't you investing more in Africa? And the answer is similar to healthcare, because there's 55 different regulatory systems. So even if we invest in mills or something like that in Zambia where they produce wheat, they can't shift that wheat across a border. And so without regulatory infrastructure, agriculture investments will still, fall flat until we get that right. At USDA, we are working very hard on that specific issue. We are leaning into the Africa-led growth idea that Africa itself wants to start an African continental free trade agreement. We support that we have worked with the African Union Commission on food safety standards, and a lot of the things that we have worked with them on have been adopted as part of the negotiations with the Africa Free Trade Agreement. So we look forward very much to seeing that to fruition and supporting that as much as we can. In terms of the second part for climate, I absolutely love the field days idea. At USDA, Secretary Vilsack, we have invested billions of dollars in trying to learn what works best in climate-smart agriculture in the U.S. And, American agriculture is leading the way on the best practices, the best technologies, and so having a way to showcase some of that stuff would be excellent. So very much support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. I now turn it back over to you, Takreem.
Thank you, Rahama. So now can I ask Franklin, Franklin Amo to please provide the summary for the digital information and communication technology recommendation?
Thank you, Takreem. Gladly. Very happy to be here. As an energetic Asian investor in African digital infrastructure and telecommunications, Bayless Emerging Markets is very pleased to share the findings of the Digital and ICT Subcommittee. The digital and ICT sectors promise to be a key vector for engagement with a continent that is both the youngest and fastest growing in the world, and thus projected to become a significant market for connectivity, communication, and digital applications. Our recommendations are focused on securing a constructive role for the U.S. private sector by ensuring inclusive, open, secure, and trusted digital infrastructure against the backdrop of a policy environment that is conducive to the shared success of the U.S. and African private sector, their workers, and their consumers. Recommendation 1 is focused on the Digital Transformation with Africa Initiative, DTA, that President Biden announced at the December 2022 U.S. Africa Business Forum. We're recommending that the initiative's lead agencies, the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. Department of State, USTDA, USAID, in coordination with the NSC African Affairs Directorate and the other relevant and vibrant government agencies, ensure increasing annual budget requests for DTA that are commensurate with its status as a presidential initiative and also adequate to meaningfully achieve results across its 3 pillars. We also feel that it should define key metrics to measure progress and success, targeting indicators that would demonstrate pillars across several different achievements, as an example, the cost of data. We also recommend that it apportion a dedicated amount of the $500 million International Technology Security and Innovation Fund, as well as the $1.5 billion Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund of the CHIPS and Science Act towards Open RAN and 5G promotion in Africa. We suggest that it conduct regular coordinated dialogue with the private sector in order to ensure the initiative is getting ongoing injection of private sector perspectives with minimum duplication of effort and resources. We also suggest that it identify opportunities with the private sector for workshops, for capacity building and training, for technical assistance to negotiators, regulators, policymakers on priority building blocks for digital trade with a focus on data flows, cybersecurity, digitization, and emerging technology. Our second recommendation pertains to the to suggestions to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, the USTR, which is well positioned to support African governments in achieving a policy and regulatory framework that will promote, facilitate, and protect infrastructure deployment, promote inclusivity, incentivize innovation, attract investment, and expand intra-African and U.S.-Africa trade and investment across the digital economy. To support these objectives, we recommend that USTR work with the AFCFTA Secretariat in prioritizing the completion of high-standard AFCFTA protocols for digital trade. We also suggest that USTR accelerate its dialogue with Kenya under the landmark U.S.-Kenya Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership, where ICT services and digital trade establish a new high-standard model for digital trade between the United States and African countries. Lastly, we suggest that U.S. embassies in Africa create a regular forum for dialogue between U.S. and African stakeholders to provide perspectives on the merits of digital trade, for inclusivity, and for focusing on small businesses, women connectivity, economic growth, innovation, and investment promotion. Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin. So now for further discussion, I turn first to Andrew Torley.
Thank you, Takrim. Africa is undergoing a rapid digital transformation. By all accounts, the digital economy should be in excess of $300 billion of GDP by 2025. African governments, African citizens, SMEs need access to great technology, to cutting-edge technology to be able to transform, whether it's a global technology platform or it is a local fintech that is innovating on the ground to provide life-changing services. We believe that high standard digital trade rules encourage regulatory and policy conditions that foster innovation, competition, and trust and participation in the digital economy. We encourage the administration to prioritize collaboration with African counterparts to promote a policy and regulatory framework and environment that facilitates trade, innovation, and inclusion. We also ask, and we all want to prioritize, that the digital economy includes, empowers, and uplifts women and SMEs. Thank you. Let me turn it over to Bruce Hansen.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Deputy Secretary, as well as all the representatives of the various U.S. government agencies gathered here to consider our recommendations. I'm Bruce Hansen, the CEO of Credence ID, a digital ID technology provider proudly based in Oakland, California. Along with 5G, digital identity is becoming increasingly important as a foundational technology for doing business in Africa. The World Bank reports that over half the population in Africa lacks a credible, secure identification document, making it difficult for governments and businesses to verify the identity of their citizens, customers, and employees. This results in higher transaction costs, increased fraud, and unequal access to important services like social benefits. Unlike Belt and Road alternatives, U.S. technology companies offer a path to overcome these challenges while still providing governments and enterprises with a reliable, secure, and privacy-ensuring method of identifying their constituents. By way of example, using U.S. technology, Ghana has enrolled close to their entire population and now has an efficient and cost-effective method of identifying citizens for multiple KYC applications, including financial inclusion, SIM card registration, and social benefit distribution. Using similar U.S. technology, Senegal uses digital ID to track pre- and post-natal healthcare outcomes for low-income women who have historically no means of identifying themselves, much less connect their identity to their healthcare records. We encourage the U.S. government to continue to support and promote cross-border trade with Africa related to this foundational technology. With that, I'll turn it over to Fran Katsoudas from Cisco.
Thank you so much. I'd like to add 2 observations as it relates to our digital and ICT recommendations. First, to bring the President's Digital Transformation with Africa initiative, funding is and will remain pivotal. With the administration begins laying the groundwork for the President's next budget, we ask that DTA be a priority. Expanding digital access and literacy is key to enabling and supporting an inclusive Africa, and we are committed to working with Congress to ensure adequate appropriations are dedicated to this very important initiative. It is also important for the U.S. to lead in the technological race on the African continent. In particular, the recommendation related to directly funding Africa on open radio access, or ORAN, is strategic and necessary from both a foreign policy and a security perspective. We can work with African nations to dismantle the proprietary technologies of the past so that we can usher in the open, secure technology of the future. Thank you, and with that, I'll hand to Olivier Puech.
Thank you, Fran, and thanks for having us today. Let me start by saying that we believe that the U.S. government and American companies investing in the continent are well positioned to work with African nations to promote, facilitate, and protect telecommunication infrastructure development that will allow to bring the benefits of connectivity across the continent. But much more is needed. As we all know, Africa has an enormous potential. Just to give you an idea, out of the 1.3 billion people in the 53 markets in Africa, we believe that around 200 million people have never made a phone call, never connected to the internet. So this is the last frontier really for our sector, and we have a lot to do there to play a key role. We're already playing a role in building a more connected Africa, as passive infrastructure is the foundation mobile connectivity and the fundamental pillar for the rollout of 5G. However, while there is a need to accelerate digital transformation, connect the unconnected, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19, policy responses from government have been timid at best. Just to give you an example as well, the mobile network operator in key markets in Africa, probably the most developed, like Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, are struggling, sometimes collapsing, are back in the hands of the local government. So there is a lot we can do, definitely, between the private and public sector to help there. Government need to put in place specific measures and promote regulatory frameworks that support critical passive telecommunication infrastructure to ensure a more productive and inclusive society. American company, the private sector, IBM, Cisco, ourselves, we are at the forefront of any technology, but with the support of the US government, with funding, sharing of best practices, know-how, we can truly make a difference to make connectivity and 5G a reality and improve the lives of millions of people across the continent. Back to you, Takrim.
Thank you, Olivier. So let me amplify a bit more on open 5G. So IBM appreciates the US government's advocacy support on this issue in its Quad discussions in Eastern Europe and in Latin America. While we appreciate the recent and increasing activities of commerce, state, and US TDA in this space, more is needed in Africa, and as Franklin expressed, move away from high-risk suppliers. We support having a portion of the multilateral security fund and possibly even a portion of the larger wireless innovation fund should be directed toward Africa, targeting both greenfield and brownfield deployments. I mean, yesterday there was an NTA's NOFO release, so we're reviewing this and more will come on that. Lastly, one note on digital policies. Through trade discussions on digital provisions, we can champion American values and approach to tech policy rather than the European approach, GDPR. So let's promote the industry-government collaborative model that takes a risk-based approach to strong privacy and security protections while enabling data to flow across borders. Let's export our tech leadership and policy model, such as the NIST frameworks on cybersecurity and AI risk management. So as NIST is under the Department of Commerce, I turn to Deputy Secretary Graves for comment.
Well, thank you very much for the recommendations on new digital transformation for Africa Initiative, DTA. I will leave the second recommendation to my colleagues from USTR, but who can speak more fully to that particular set of recommendations. But I'll just note that the Commerce Department fully supports USTR's leadership on the MOU with the AFCFTA and on the strategic partnership with Kenya. And we're going to continue to work with them to advocate for the priorities of the U.S. private sector in all of these engagements. Building off of the several of the comments, we know how important the digital and ICT sectors are today, both domestically, but just as importantly around the world, and especially how fiercely competitive these sectors are today. Anyone who's spent enough time with the president knows that he often has colorful ways of describing things. So he talks about an inflection point in a certain way. He says, the way that he was taught, his physics professor would say, an inflection point is basically you're driving down a road and you make a turn of the steering wheel 20 degrees and you're headed in a different direction and you can't ever get back to where you were. And so we are at that point as it relates to what's going on in Africa, all across the continent. That turn has already been made. So we're having to move very, very quickly to make sure that we're getting ahead of where our new vector would lead us. Certainly that is the case for ORAN and 5G, and I will tell you that I'm glad you're looking at the NOFO that NTIA has put out, but expect that there will be much more beyond just the Innovation Fund as it relates to ways that we can focus on working on across the continent on those issues. But more broadly, part of the reason that the president created and launched the DTA and it's why Commerce is working so closely with TDA is we're focused on the co-leading the pillar that's focused on the digital economy and infrastructure. We know how important it is to the U.S. private sector and to the continent, and we're coordinating very closely with State Department, with USAID, who also lead the pillars on the enabling environment and human capital, respectively, because we know that it isn't just about the digital economy and infrastructure. It's a much broader set of tools that we have to bring to the table. I am very pleased to report that just earlier today, we had the very first meeting of our new Africa Digital Policy Council, the ADPC, which is the interagency, for those that don't know all of our acronyms and names, it's the interagency convening body for DTA. I'm very proud that our Assistant Secretary for Global Markets and the Director General for the U.S. Foreign and Commercial Service will serve alongside our partners at the National Security Council and the Africa Directorate, so thank you, Judd, as co-chair of this council. Issues of funding for the initiative, metrics for tracking and driving success, and stakeholder engagement are top priorities on the agenda of the Policy Council. We hear you loud and clear. We know that it's critical for success in this area, and I can absolutely assure you that as we implement the DTA going forward, you will see engagement between the ADPC and private sector entities, partners, including and especially the PAC. So I will hush because there's other partners who can go into more depth on some of the other components. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. I now recognize the Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Africa, Osvaldo Gomez-Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of USTR, I also like to commend the efforts that the PAC is undertaking to strengthen the commercial engagement between the U.S. and Africa. Let me get to the recommendations at hand. As to the recommendation on the AFCFTA, I would emphasize that the Biden administration is keen to help harness the economic gains of the AFCFTA. The Memorandum of Understanding that Ambassador Tai and Secretary General Mann signed at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, it will increase U.S.-African coordination and collaboration with the AFCFTA Secretariat in order to support continental economic integration, attract investment, and improve the livelihoods of all in the continent. Furthermore, the United States government is committed to providing technical assistance to support the AFCFTA protocol on digital trade through the U.S. Agency for International Development Support for a digital advisor and other related activities. As to the recommendation on Kenya, I would like to stress that digital trade is among the 11 topics identified by the U.S. and Kenyan government for priority focus under the U.S.-Kenya Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. The United States and Kenya share an interest in fostering consumer, business, and worker trust in the digital economy, ensuring access to information, promoting the development and use of resilient and secure digital infrastructure, promoting competition and the participation of micro, small, and medium enterprises in addressing discriminatory practices. This U.S.-Kenya talks are following an intensive schedule with a conceptual round that took place in Washington the week of February 6th, and the first negotiating round in Nairobi taking place next week. Again, thank you. Over to you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. I now recognize Ambassador Molly Fee.
Thanks very much. And thanks for including me in this discussion. The presentations were particularly thoughtful and constructive. And Mr. Deputy Secretary, congratulations on launching, I'll spell it out, the Africa Digital Policy Council, which will be important to all of us, and we're grateful for your leadership and support, and as well as all the work that Eno does on this issue, because I know it's dear to her heart. So I think it's obvious to everybody here that digital access, digital trade, digital policy are critical to achieving all of our broader economic goals. So I think you want me to talk about the money. So let me talk about that. As you might imagine, I have a great need for many resources from the U.S. Congress. But we definitely share the view that we need to see this initiative fully funded. So we already have submitted that recommendation in previous budget submissions, and we will continue to do that. We will continue to advocate. And given that we have a lot of good partners in the U.S. government around the table within the administration, hopefully we'll have some luck with OMB and possibly some luck with the Hill. So we all recognize the need for the funding. I think you all know within the CHIPS and Science Act, there's a fund called the International Technology Security and Innovation Fund. And that seems like a good source for some of the work that we need to do together to contribute to implementation of the DTA. That is a discussion that's ongoing within the State Department. There's a lot of competition for those resources, as you know, because they're meant to be applied globally. But we have made clear the points that you have raised here today, the centrality of this issue for Africa. So we will continue to focus on that. Secretary Blinken, as you may know, is trying to drag the State Department into the 21st century. He has a modernization agenda, and that included establishing a Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. And I just had to look down to make sure I had the name correct. That's how new it is. But we are working with them to see how we can collaborate and coordinate, so to take advantage in particular of their expertise in cybersecurity and digital connectivity. And you all know, of course, our colleagues in the Bureau of Economic and Commercial Affairs, so they, in turn, with all the U.S. government colleagues here, will help us make sure we keep the dialogue going with you as you have recommended. So thank you, Mr. Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much. So now back to you, Rahama, for the energy and environment recommendations.
Thank you, Takreem. I'd like to invite Nicole Poindexter to provide a summary of the recommendations.
Thank you, Rahama. As we all know, there are substantial opportunities to invest in energy, environment, and the energy efficiency sectors in Africa. And at scale, these investments will make African economies more sustainable, both environmentally and economically. However, there's still several challenges to ramping up U.S. investment to fulfill on that promise. With that in mind, you'll note our specific recommendations in the document, but in summary, in order to meet the goals of universal, sustainable, and abundant energy access in Africa, we focused in on 3 specific challenges and opportunities to increase investment in energy deals. Mismatches between USG deal-making capabilities with the energy deals that are present on the continent today. Risks, both actual and perceived, that can deter investment at scale. And unfulfilled opportunities in policy innovation to make Africa a more exciting market for U.S. private investors, unlocking the most active capital markets in the world. These challenges, deal sizes, managing investment risk, and market attractiveness, are not new, but they remain intractable, which is why the core of our recommendation is to initiate a public-private sector working group with Prosper Africa as the secretariat, with key participants as DFC, MCC, Power Africa, and others to define programs, to collaborate, and to amplify solutions that may already be there today that will seed and grow the investment in Africa's energy infrastructure and Africa's partnership in the world's future. Our second recommendation is that we congratulate Power Africa on its 10th year anniversary. And we see this anniversary as an opportunity for the PAC to be part of Power Africa's substantive review of their experiences and their impact over the course of the past 10 years. Working with Power Africa, we hope to build on those lessons learned and to create a roadmap for the next 10 years of Power Africa's role in energy infrastructure on the continent. And also to use those lessons learned as a blueprint as we look at investing in climate mitigation and other environmental opportunities, which brings us to our third recommendation. We want to look beyond energy to focus on environmental opportunities. To enable advancements in the circular economy, we recommend that a combination of EPA, USTDA, Prosper Africa engage with African countries to address policy changes and engage with the private sector on technology investment opportunities. Waste management is a good example, where many African countries are beginning to develop agendas to address plastic pollution. Through the activities associated with this recommendation, we would ensure a consistent policy framework across countries to facilitate investment in U.S.-led technologies that reduce waste, increase jobs, and grow value creation within the economies. By implementing these recommendations, we can maximize U.S. private sector participation in the clean energy sector in Africa, unlock capital, and address broader environmental challenges. In closing, I want to thank my co-chairs in the Energy and Environment Committee, particularly the leadership of Dow's Sami Minish and his team. Unfortunately, he was unable to be with us today. And Rife International CEO Kwabena Sarpong. Thank you, and we look forward to investing in this partnership with you.
Thank you, Nicole. I would like to now turn to Kwabena Osei Sarpong to add additional comments.
Thank you, Rahma. Thank you, Secretary Graves, for your leadership and for being here. I'm CEO of Rife International, a company that is focused on developing solar energy and renewable energy efficiency projects in the commercial industrial market in Africa. We see firsthand the challenges American businesses face, especially funding for renewable energy projects, climate tech projects, as Nicole mentioned, compared to some of our other counterparts in the overall clean energy transition in Africa. That said, these solutions that we presented, we hope will help small businesses who make up about 80 to 90% of all American businesses participate in this sector, and that's a gap that we see. Similar challenges, I believe, apply for larger projects, and I'm sure my counterparts here will talk about it. Deputy Secretary Graves, I know you and your team have especially been working on this since our last conversation in December. So kudos to you on that, and I'm looking forward to hear more on that. We're also happy to partner and implement, what has been done so far. And Nicole already mentioned Sammy's involvement from Dow on our recommendations, so I'll leave that alone, but he did a tremendous job. He's not here with us today, but I wanted to also kind of give him some kudos for his work. That said, I would lead on to Brenda.
Thank you. It's an honor to represent GE today on the PAC, particularly on the recommendations covering the energy topic. As a very brief summary, our technology is responsible for generating 1/3 of the world's electricity, and we have a deep presence on the continent across the power value chain, including both traditional sources of fuel and newly emerging technologies. In the recommendation for a Power Africa review, we applaud the focus on supporting African governments in developing an all-in energy policy, inclusive of both available and developing technologies to promote a more sustainable environment. We stand ready to support its implementation. It is a common statistic that more than 600 million African people, which is about half of the continent's population, lack access to electricity. The deployment of gas power on the continent can make a tremendous impact on people's lives by providing the access to power that is very much needed on the continent. In this way, natural gas can be part of the energy transition because it can be deployed to support energy production needed to achieve substantial international development objectives. Efforts are accelerating to decarbonize gas power with breakthrough technologies in both the pre- and post-combustion phase, namely through the use of hydrogen as a fuel source. We are aware of the State Department's stated intention to brief the US private sector on the administration's international energy policy and exemption process for carbon-intensive fuels. We anxiously await such a briefing and hope the exemption process is actionable as part of Power Africa's goals. Thank you, and I'd now like to hand over to Catherine, who is joining us virtually from Caterpillar.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm not there to be in person with everybody, but what a fantastic meeting. I would just like to reiterate what my colleague from GE commented on. From a Caterpillar perspective, not only do we help supply worldwide the energy required to power up everything from hospitals to schools to cities, but we make the equipment to provide the infrastructure to develop the energy. And we would like to highlight the recommendation on the future of Power Africa. In order to secure a prosperous future for the people of Africa, energy supply must meet the anticipated increased demand. Power Africa should advocate for utilizing inclusive energy technology and all of the above solution, which is where US companies can excel. The flexible energy technologies of fuel cells, battery storage, alternatives, renewables, and traditional fuels will all be needed to provide the reliable and affordable energy that Africa needs to leapfrog from where they are to where they want to be. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Catherine. I would now like to turn to Mr. Scott Cameron from Prosper Africa.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to respond to this important recommendation. As many of you know, Prosper Africa works with our 17 partner U.S. government agencies and departments to increase two-way trade and investment across a range of priority sectors in Africa, including the energy sector. At the African Leadership Summit, Prosper Africa was proud to convene and catalyze more than $15 billion in trade and investment commitments from across the public and private sectors. This included $4 billion in energy commitments with a focus on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and circular economy projects in Africa. Moving forward, we are committed to working with our partners to deliver on these commitments. We support the recommendation to establish a working group in collaboration with our Prosper Africa partner agencies. And in addition, I wanted to highlight 2 relevant Prosper Africa services that businesses and investors can make use of today, not only in the energy and environment sector, but many of the key sectors we've discussed throughout our conversation today. First, our team of Prosper Africa advisors is standing ready to advise investors on opportunities across the energy sector and others. We can help investors identify and assess bankable projects and investments that fit their mandates, and we can make referrals to partner agencies, particularly for guarantees and insurance that reduce the cost of capital for projects. Our advisors work in close collaboration with Power Africa, as well as our partner agencies, including Exim and DFC. Second, the Prosper Africa U.S. Institutional Investor Program exposes large investors such as pension funds, endowments, insurance companies, and others to Africa risk and connects them with credible managers and transactions. Through this program, we facilitate some of these transactions, like a $100 million investment in the first hydro project in West Africa, as well as a $276 million bond issuance that just closed a few weeks ago. We look forward to moving ahead in this partnership with the interagency and all of you on these critical issues to maximize these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. We are running a little late on time, so I would like to now turn back to Deputy Secretary Graves.
I will be very brief. Let me just say that the recommendations that you provided are fantastic. I agree that they're needed and that we can leverage multiple interagency resources to do this. Just being a little bit of a homer here, Patent and Trademark Office and National Institutes of Standards and Technology are huge resources in this space to drive U.S. clean tech, as well as, I didn't say this earlier, the Minority Business Development Agency, focusing on small and underserved businesses in this country, do more on Africa. In my view, there's a multi-pronged export promotion program for the U.S. clean tech industry. And as we work closely with the Department of Energy, and I think I can check right now, 48 hours ago, and 48 hours ago, I was meeting with Deputy Secretary of Energy, Dave Turk. You can see he just emailed me. We were talking.
I can verify.
We were talking about this very issue. Secretary Granholm gave me a call over the weekend. We're also bringing our resources together with the Department of Energy and with all of our interagency partners. We have a network of over 100 U.S. export assistance centers across the country that can connect U.S. companies with the products and services. The companies, we can connect with companies across the country and help to bring the products and services to the continent in ways that we can amplify the work that you're doing or help to bring new products and services to market. Our ITA has some new innovative approaches to this work. Our Office of Energy and Environmental Industries at ITA is supporting U.S. competitiveness in clean tech through our enhanced advocacy for all of you all who are in that industry, promotion of foreign direct investment in U.S. companies. And if you don't know about it, we have our Select USA conference coming up in just a couple of weeks, the largest opportunity to get foreign direct investment into the United States. Part of our effort is our recent partnership with the State Department to launch a new Clean Tech Strategies Strategic Projects Fund that will support innovative programs to assist U.S. clean tech exporters and to support developing country trade partners to deploy technologies that address climate change. There are 19 countries in Africa that are eligible for support through the fund, and our teams at ITA and at State Department will carefully consider and consult with every relevant interagency partner on how we can take your ideas and bring programs and resources to bear on all of these efforts. Did I go quickly enough?
You did.
Thank you.
Takreem, turning over to you.
Thank you, Rahama. So now for the last set of recommendations for financing and infrastructure, I invite John Nevergold to provide a summary.
Thank you to Kareem. Good afternoon. It's good to be here with you today. This is an exciting time. I've never seen African countries in the private sector more eager to build relationships with American companies. And that's a testament to President Biden and the administration. You've set us up to succeed. You've stepped up at a time when there's a global competition to be the leading partner with Africa politically and economically. And that's why we're here today. On behalf of the Finance and Infrastructure Subcommittee, it's my privilege to share our recommendations so that we have the right tools to fully unlock that promise. We don't have time to go into every recommendation, but let me draw attention to just a few in each category. First, updating and establishing financial tools for U.S. companies to be more competitive. We urge you to bring the Export-Import Bank in line with our European allies. We applaud its reauthorization, but when it was not authorized, other export credit agencies evolved. Our recommendations will align EXIM with current market conditions so American companies can be competitive. The most important update is to allow EXIM to calculate export credit value, which determines the coverage ECA can provide, just like our European allies do. This means including all products destined for the project that are bought outside the country where work's being performed, whether it's from the U.S. or other countries. Until project sponsors are able to get a fully wrapped funding solution when using EXIM, like they do with other ECAs, U.S. companies will miss out on export opportunities and job creation. We understand the intent with the current policy, but in practice, it's better for U.S. exporters to get 25 or 30% of a project versus nothing. Our report offers other essential ways to improve EXIM, such as clarity on loan tenor in the beginning of a project and direct disbursement for long-term coverage and local costs. But this first change is the most important for U.S. companies to be competitive. I'll quickly draw your attention to two other recommendations in this category. First, we urge you to allow DFC to provide funding to government and government-owned entities. Without it, we're taking the largest counterparty in an African country off the table for U.S. companies to work with. And second, we urge you to establish new blended finance tools to encourage and mobilize one of our most vital assets to invest in Africa, our financial markets. An Africa-focused investment fund with catalytic capital from the U.S. government would mobilize U.S. private markets to follow. Let me turn now to our second category of recommendations. We urge you to optimize existing government resources to help achieve our goals for the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. One way is by shifting resources and giving a broader mandate to USTDA. Another is by expanding Commerce's U.S. foreign commercial service presence in Africa. And third is enhanced communication on support available from the State Department's PGII team. Finally, we urge the U.S. government to negotiate more bilateral investment treaties and double taxation treaties with African countries where appropriate. These treaties would attract U.S. private sector investment and reduce the political risk of doing business in Africa. Before ending, I want to leave you with one more thought. Time and again in history, American companies have stepped up when they needed to. And we have every confidence that if you implement these recommendations and provide us the tools we need to succeed, we will do it again. American companies will win, and we'll ensure our African partners win too. Thank you for your time, and Deputy Secretary Graves, thanks for hosting us here today.
Thank you, John. So now I invite discussion among council members, starting with our co-chair, Peter Sullivan.
Thank you, Takreem. In the interest of time, I won't say much, but I do feel that the U.S. has an extreme competitive advantage in finance and financial innovation. And, many of the recommendations that we put forward, encompasses those innovations. And I would, advocate that we look strongly at that and become very much a leader in financial innovation for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Gad Coyne.
Thank you. Just to emphasize some of the key aspects of our recommendations, all of which were designed to increase private sector investment and trade between the U.S. and Africa. And one of them is to improve the enabling environment for American companies by increasing the number of bilateral investment treaties, as was mentioned by John, with African countries. Today, there are only 9 such treaties and only 4 double taxation treaties with African countries. The other is to increase project preparation resources, and in particular, widening USTDA's scope of intervention, especially for US-led projects as part of the global partnership on infrastructure and investment. Again, with the goal of developing bankable projects that catalyze the export of U.S. goods and services. Finally, and to tie it all together, as more often than not, the principal counterparts in our transactions are African governments or parastatal companies, we also see the need to expand the foreign commercial service footprint in Africa to level the playing field. I now turn to Mr. Sibrel.
Thank you. Bill Kiley?
Thank you. All the points that John has outlined and the infrastructure and financing section are of paramount importance. To emphasize, though, on two items that have been raised with real-world implications for an SME. One, when using EXIM services, Acrobridge is required to use U.S. flag vessels under the MARID regulations. On a recent opportunity where we presented budget figures, freight costs for shipping the steel highway bridges to the destination port on the U.S. flag was $31 million. Had we had the flexibility to use a non-U.S. flag vessel, our freight costs would have been $12 million. That's a 260% premium. So due to the freight dollar differential, ACRO was not competitive on that particular opportunity. Second, being able to quote in currencies of the African continent would assist the likes of an ACRO to be more competitive. And I think very importantly, it would also assist the local governments by insulating them from the currency fluctuations that appear in the markets. So that's it. Thank you. And I guess I would be introducing Sibrel, Mr. Sibrel.
Thank you very much. I'd first of all like to add my thanks to the administration officials present today for your time and engagement on these recommendations. And I'd like to emphasize the importance of our recommendation that DFC be allowed the flexibility to lend to governments or sovereigns and credit-worthy state-owned enterprises. In Bechtel's work delivering large-scale infrastructure projects in multiple markets around the world, the customer is almost always a government entity or a state-linked body like a power utility. If we want US companies to participate in large-scale infrastructure in Africa in a meaningful way, we really need to apply all of our tools, and DFC can be a very powerful one. I'd also like to urge in a more open view toward government-to-government agreements that provide a path for US companies to compete more successfully for infrastructure projects of national importance. These agreements are often welcomed by partner governments as a statement of commitment by the two governments to enhance bilateral trade and investment. Other governments, our competitor governments, are taking advantage of such mechanisms to positive effect, but they've not been a regular feature of US commercial engagement. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to Takreem. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite Deepak Chopra? You're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about it. I just want to thank everybody. It's a real pleasure to be doing that. OSI is a company, one of the core products we make is in the security. We are the world's largest supplier of security products for airports, border crossings, ports. I believe with the experience we've had, one of the things we all talk about, infrastructure and investment, we need to work with the African countries to enhance and improve their security at ports, border crossings, airports, so that the commerce, people going back and forth, they can all get the benefit of it. You can't do commerce, you can't do business with countries if you don't have the infrastructure built at ports and borders and crossings. So any investment that can be made by help from the US government would be a big help to enhance and update the technology, not just for security, but one of the things we all forget about it is that these kind of inspections and security also work to the advantage of what I call GDP expansion of the country for the imports coming in, so that the duty evasion and wrongful way of going all the duty offsetting can be avoided. We think that as the infrastructure investment is done by the US, it would be a great help to enhance the technology at airports, border crossings, and airports to make the African countries updated. And one of the things which is a great asset is, think about it, if they can share customs data with the European countries and the US, the shipping can become faster, the people going back in and out can go faster, and the customs clearance can be done faster when the ships leave and come to a US port or a European port, so that the commerce becomes more advantageous. With that, I'll just say thank you. And one of the things that US can do right now is to offset our other competition, which is China, which has done a lot in Africa for different loans and stuff to get the infrastructure, their Silk Route train that you're talking about. We as America should be encouraging the African countries to update their technology and to open their borders for better technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deepak. So now I invite administration officials to provide comments, starting with Undersecretary Graves.
Thank you very much. This topic or set of topics, I think, is relevant to pretty much all of the members of the PAC, so in one way or another. So I want to thank the subcommittee for incorporating all of the various interests of the PAC and representing private industry. And I want to commend the council on zeroing in on some very precise, specific recommendations. It's very useful for us, the more precision that you provide. On behalf of Commerce, I want to acknowledge your recommendation to expand the commercial service footprint in Africa. I know that the PAC has recommended this in the past, and that's a strong endorsement of, I think, of the good work that that our team has done, and also having strong commercial diplomats on the ground is in advocating for U.S. businesses and navigating the markets and building long-term relationships. We're actually in the process of considering options for expanding our footprint in Africa. Of course, that is dependent on our friends in Congress and their willingness to give us additional resources. And while expansion is a major priority for us and for the president, I'd also be very interested to hear at some point, not today, obviously, any advice, guidance that you have individually or as a PAC on how we can strengthen the services that we provide and our teams themselves. I'd also like to comment on your assessment in the report on the need for more flexibility in financing, the demonstrated bankability of infrastructure projects in Africa. Our team, I know Ambassador Fee's team at State Department, as well as our colleagues across the administration, Director Ibong, Hazine and the XM team, Andy, and the DFC team, range of other parts of the department are going to be reviewing these recommendations very carefully. We'll also explore options for augmenting G2G engagement with our African partners, specifically to focus on enhancing capacity for building high standards on projects that play to the strengths of all of your businesses and U.S. business strengths overall. With that, I will turn it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Graves. So I now turn to USTDA Director Ibong.
Thank you, Takrim. I'll keep this very short. I want to also acknowledge and thank the PAC for the recommendation to increase USTDA's project preparation resources and scope. These are critical for defining the technical requirements and attracting the financing for US-led infrastructure projects in Africa. The Biden-Harris administration has recognized the strategic importance of our work, as well as our record of success of working with the U.S. private sector to develop sustainable infrastructure in Africa while supporting U.S. jobs and exports. This is reflected in the President's budget request for fiscal year 2024, which includes a record budget proposed for USTDA. Increased resources like these will enhance our ability to collaborate with U.S. industry to advance the goals of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, including closing that infrastructure gap in Africa using American goods and services. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Helena Matza from PGII.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the PAC's recommendations on how we can optimize USG resources to achieve the goals of PGII, whether that's from better resourcing tools to develop bankable projects, to quality standards, to adjusting policy positions on tools that aren't quite meeting your needs yet. Our PGI office is meant to be a resource and one of the first points of contact for the private sector to discuss and identify the best USG or partner tools available to advance your infrastructure priorities. In fact, Director Ibong and I were already having a conversation on the margins of today about how we can better leverage USTDA project preparation tools. So recommendations already hard at work and part of what we're doing. But we're also working in very close coordination on another recommendation you included for us, both with XM and the Mineral Security Partnership, on how we can do more deployment around critical mineral project preparation, including bringing several USG resources to bear to support the development of cleaner battery-grade processing for nickel and beneficiation in Tanzania, which the Vice President was able to launch just the other week. I welcome the opportunity to follow up with the PAC members to better understand how we can communicate our role and the range of USG tools and resources available in line with the recommendations you provided. And John already has me on the hook for that, and we're looking forward to it. In addition, I just want to raise one other point. The PGI also aims to act as a coordinating hub, not only within our own system, but with our G7 plus partners to help map out our comparative advantages on public resourcing tools to better determine where it makes sense for each partner to intervene. This can mean that the U.S. government provides financing for a project with companies from the EU and vice versa. Our respective G7 partners fund various interventions in the region, and together, the goal is to make a greater economic impact both on our economic goals and development priorities as well. So really important for cases where the G7 tools may be able to help you more. We want to serve as a place where we can connect you to those opportunities. One quick example is that we're working to advance projects in Angola, DRC, and Zambia that involve U.S. companies, but also those from France, Portugal, and Australia. We're going to continue to work to set up the mechanisms to improve information sharing and project pipeline with our G7 partners, as well as all the governments and countries that we work in, and ensure that that information is readily available to our private sector partners. We hope to make some of these announcements coming up on the margins of the G7 later this month and continue to take in feedback from you all. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I invite Hazin Ashby from XM.
All right. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here today. As America's official export credit agency, Congress has mandated XM's mission to support American jobs by facilitating the export of U.S.-made goods and services. We hear you, we see your recommendations, and we understand it, but I will say it again, Congress has mandated that XM's mission is to support American jobs by facilitating the export of U.S.-made goods and services. Since its creation 89 years ago, XM has played a critical role in fostering economic opportunities for U.S. manufacturing and American jobs. Currently, our President and Chair, Rita Jo Lewis, is taking bold steps to modernize the agency and strengthen American supply chains along our USG partners like the Department of Commerce to advance the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing within our statutory limitations. Chair Lewis's broad goals since arriving at XM a year ago have focused on 3 goals: resetting XM's relationship with exporters and buyers around the world, renewing the agency's commitment to supporting the creation of jobs in the U.S., and rebuilding XM's priorities to meet the challenges that are before us in this new era. As part of our congressional mandate to increase financing to sub-Saharan Africa, EXIM fully recognizes that Africa is an important region for business opportunities and job creation for U.S. exporters. In fact, in her first year, Chair Lewis has traveled to the continent twice. Last month, she attended the regional AmCham event in Kenya and then joined VP Harris in Zambia, right after the VP announced EXIM's intent to sign a $500 million MOU with Tanzania, which Chair Lewis signed on Tuesday. Last November, Chair Lewis participated in the Africa Investment Forum in Cote d'Ivoire, the Bern Union in Rwanda, and COP27 in Egypt. Then, at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, EXIM signed MOUs in excess of $1 billion. I am pleased to announce that when we sign our MOUs, they are undergirded by deals, and our team is already currently working to underwrite several transactions under those MOUs. Thanks again for inviting EXIM to be part of this conversation. We'll continue to work to support American jobs and U.S. manufacturing per our congressional mandate.
Thank you. I now recognize Andrew Eskovich from the DFC.
Thank you, and thanks to the PAC-DBIA and for the acknowledgement of Power Africa, which was launched 10 years ago. But really, around the same time that the original PAC-DBIA was created, which helped us shape a lot of these initiatives, including Power Africa and Prosper Africa. So these types of meetings are absolutely critical to helping the U.S. government come up with tools that respond to what your needs are. And so we're most successful when you bring us the deals, but we're also most successful when you identify the obstacles to the deals. And you tell us what's needed, and you tell us, how we can help. And that's what made Power Africa and Prosper Africa successful, and hope that will continue to be the case. So we really appreciate these recommendations. A couple of things that are different about DFC from what OPIC did, which I think are really critical to helping advance this agenda. Number one is the fact that we no longer have a U.S. nexus. While intuitively you might think that that means that that's not beneficial to U.S. companies, it's actually quite the opposite. One of the things that we've learned is we've significantly expanded our client base, but when DFC is able to participate in infrastructure projects that are brought to us by non-U.S. companies, it allows us to get certain trade and investment leads, which we can share with U.S. companies. So it actually increases the opportunities for U.S. companies. The other major distinction between DFC and OPIC is that we don't have a requirement to earn a return in the same way that OPIC did, which means that we have the flexibility to take on more risk. We can price our transactions to advance development and to advance our foreign policy goals. And we're only getting used to doing that right now. We're doing more and more. We're really thrilled with how successful we've been to date in terms of expanding our portfolio and doing more and more deals. But I think we're going to be doing a lot more in the coming years. To address the specific recommendation about DFC having the authority to provide financing to sovereigns, I just want to point out that we actually have that authority right now. And I just would want to caution people to remember that one of the things that distinguishes our model from the People's Republic of China is the fact that we don't want to contribute to the sovereign debt of the countries that we're trying to benefit. So while we have that authority, we would use it very, very sparingly in only really compelling cases that are going to advance a significant foreign policy or a significant development goal. Similarly, with state-owned enterprises, we have supported transactions with state-owned enterprises. During COVID, for example, we supported regional banks that were owned by sovereigns so that they could expand their liquidity. And we're looking at other transactions for areas that are critically important, like fertilizer. So we have this authority, but we also want to make sure that we remain credible when we tell host governments that we're not seeking to contribute to their sovereign debt and push them up against their IMF debt limits and creating sovereign debt traps. So we appreciate this input. We look forward to the continued conversations and just keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Cameron Alford from MCC.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to all of the members. If I can quickly just build on Andy's comments about the importance of earlier recommendations. You all may know that the idea for the American Catalyst Facility for Development was born out of an earlier PAC-DBIA recommendation that MCC and the former OPIC worked together on developing blended finance investments in Africa. And so now ACFD, this partnership between MCC and DFC, is operational. and we are incorporating it into our programs. And we appreciate that the PAC has recognized the importance of ACFD as a tool for facilitating investment on the continent. And so, consistent with the recommendation, we certainly look forward to exploring how to further expand its use. Thank you.
Thank you. So now let's hear from Eric Meyer, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Africa at Treasury.
Thank you, and I just want to start by thanking the PAC for the tremendous work and the efforts that went into pulling together these recommendations. They're incredibly important to the work that we all do to support the administration's strategy for deepening the United States' economic relationship with Africa. I also have to say I was really pleased in listening to the recommendations across all the sectors to see how much this aligned with the messages that Secretary Yellen heard during her trip to Africa in January, where she met with American investors and entrepreneurs in almost every sector that the PAC has identified as a priority here. The recommendations in this section point to the need for creative solutions to support the flow of private capital into hard-to-finance spaces. And related to that, I want to comment a little bit on the blended finance component. The fact of the matter is that in many emerging economies, some amount of concessional financing is needed to mobilize private capital, even for high-quality, well-prepared projects. And therefore, we at Treasury support the development of blended finance solutions that adhere to best practices and that drive investment towards sectors critical for development. Turning to recommendation 2, I just want to say we welcome that American businesses here see the opportunities in the work under PGII to close Africa's infrastructure financing gap, and we see tremendous opportunities there to build on that across the government and the private sector. Finally, let me make a quick comment on one of the recommendations in recommendation 3, one of the specific recommendations there related to double taxation treaties. And I just want to throw out maybe a little bit of a caution here. Based on our review of the existing literature, we're not sure that double taxation treaties are the best way to stimulate investment. And there are a couple of factors that Treasury takes into account when deciding where and when to pursue double taxation treaties. This is based on the level of U.S. investment in a country, but probably most importantly, whether those investments are experiencing unrelieved double taxation issues, and that's an important driver of where and when we dedicate the resources. There's also a part of that related to the net effect of the treaty on American tax revenues, which we cannot underestimate. But thank you, and we'll take on board these.
Thank you. Now for the final comments in this section, I recognize again Osvaldo Gomez-Martinez from USTR.
Again, thank you. I'll be brief since I'm the last person listed in this conversation. With regards to the recommendation on negotiating bilateral investment treaties, USTR shares an interest in enabling investment climates for U.S. investors to deepen our trade and investment ties with our African partners. Beyond focusing on initiatives that just facilitate more investment, we are particularly more interested in promoting high-quality investment that creates sustainable and inclusive economic growth and benefits workers, consumers, and businesses of all sizes. The U.S.-Kenya Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership that we are currently negotiating with Kenya is, I think, one example of such an effort. On that note, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So now I turn back to you, Ron.
Thank you, Takreem. I would like to go back to the Energy and Environment Subcommittee and invite John Irons of Power Africa, followed by Ms. Claire Amon of the SBA to offer their remarks.
Thank you. I'm extremely proud to be representing all of our interagency partners who make fantastic contributions to Power Africa. And I wanted to say, though, especially that in order to achieve our development objectives, which are increased energy generation, access to power, and emissions reductions, we can only achieve those if our private sector partners, we have 180 private sector partners, we can only achieve those development objectives if our partners are successful. So everything we do is based on trying to improve the ability for private sector partners to access markets, to expand markets. And so that is really key to our whole business model. So we very much welcome the recommendations and looking forward to being part of the working group. And also looking forward to your advice. As Andy said, you know, we started with a lot of private sector input. We've always had the private sector partners. So when we look forward to our next 10 years, we will, you know, it's key to have that private sector input. So we look forward to doing that report. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here to speak at the PAC. It's an honor to be maybe the last speaker, too. So our mission at the Small Business Administration, our Office of International Trade, is really to enhance the ability of U.S. small businesses to compete in the global marketplace. Small businesses make up 97% of all U.S. exporters to Africa. Aligned with the administration's climate goals, this year we have a priority on focus on sustainability and supporting small business clean technology and environmental exports. We are working very closely with the Department of Commerce on a series of webinars focusing on export opportunities for U.S. small businesses in the environment and clean technology sectors. The first of these webinars is on May 11th, and it will focus on opportunities to Africa. Please spread the word. We think this aligns very well with recommendations 1 and 3 outlined by the PAC in the report. It also supports SBA's ongoing work to reach underserved and diaspora communities, in particular the African diaspora. The SBA has counseling and advice, export promotion grants, and export financing loans designed for small businesses to help them take advantage of export opportunities. So we're very proud to be part of this very important initiative, and I must say it's really wonderful to see small business co-chairing the PAC. So thank you very much, and back over to you, Rahama.
Thank you, Claire. Well, we're nearing the end of our conversation. I would like to thank my fellow PAC members for their continued commitment to our important agenda and all the work that the staff reps do to ensure that the private sector voice is included in U.S. trade engagement with Africa. I also want to thank our interagency colleagues who make our collaboration successful. Deputy Secretary Graves, we want to thank the leadership at Commerce. We want to thank Secretary Raimondo, Das Richardson for reauthorizing and reappointing the PAC, and not only doing that, but really having a strong commitment to diversity and inclusion. We look forward to working with you in the coming year to make sure that our agenda is achieved. And we know that the success of our efforts will lay the foundation for a future where both the U.S. and Africa thrive together as strong interdependent partners. So now I would like to move to adopting our recommendation, and I would like to make a motion to adopt the recommendation. Can I get a motion to second that?
I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you, Franklin. So now we will do a voice vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those not in favor, say aye. And do we have any abstentions? All right. It sounds like the report has been adopted. Peter, I would like to now turn to you for closing remarks.
Thank you, Rahama, and wanted to thank my fellow members who share the PAC recommendations and from the U.S. government officials for their engagement and responses. With these adopted recommendations, I'd like to reiterate that the PAC is ready and willing to work with the U.S. interagency on the implementation of the items discussed today. But that's just the start, as we look forward to continuing to build on the momentum of the Biden administration's focus on a stronger U.S.-African commercial engagement and the demonstration of a strong and visible partnership between the U.S. public and private sectors. I would like now to invite Deputy Secretary Graves to give his final remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the chairs and the vice chair. And most importantly, on behalf of President Biden and Vice President Harris, I want to thank all of the members of the PAC-DBIA for your collaboration, the guidance that you've provided. It is absolutely vital that you continue to give us your best thinking, your best advice for us to do everything that we'd like to do in partnership with our friends across the continent. You've given us a lot of work to do. You've given us a lot to think about, and I am excited to see everything that we can do as we work together creatively to get to those steps of practical implementation. But as Rahma, as you already mentioned, the term is not over. The PAC's job is still ongoing. We have 13 months left in the current first term of this administration. And I know that the Secretary and I and my colleagues across the interagency are excited to continue to tap into the depth of practical expertise, the knowledge that you all bring to the table every day. So we will consult with our colleagues across the interagency, certainly working with our good friends here at the White House, and we'll get back to you very soon with the clear, very clear next steps so that you can continue your work for the remainder of your term. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. And we can't end this meeting without thanking Giancarlo for wrangling all of us and all his hard work. And also Fred over there in the corner. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. The meeting is adjourned. This needs to be louder. Thank you.